Hi gang, Rob here. It is the afternoon of 22 June 2018. Coming to you today with a knife review. Yeah, I sure am. And what an interesting blade it is, hiding in this rather gorgeous and versatile black leather sheath. As some of you know, I spent last weekend in Escanaba, Michigan for the June grind-in at Bark River Knives. While in the area, I decided to pop in on one of the many very talented custom knife makers that have congregated in that area of the Upper Peninsula on Little Bay du Noc. And Matt Martin of Vehement Knives has characterized that region as New Sheffield, with a tip of the cap to Sheffield, England, back in the old days, where the craft of knife making was centralized. So I've tried to visit one of these guys every time I make a trip up there, and I've sort of concentrated on a couple of them. You guys know I've done several videos with Uncle Jesse Hemphill, and I've certainly featured Vehement Knives on this channel, specifically an awesome custom 3V fighter that I got from Matt, won it in a raffle, believe it or not. And I thought, you know, who have I really not talked to much, whose work I really admire? And the answer is, in June of 2018, Dan Tope of Tope Knives, Rapid River, Michigan, just 13 miles up the road from the Bark River factory in Escanaba. Dan is not a young man, certainly not as old as I am. And Dan, weigh in the comments if you care to. I think Dan's probably around 40-ish, has several children, and is married, and what a great family they are. And Dan is a former paramedic who for several years did that for a living, and then made custom knives as an avocation. Certainly he sold them for money, but it wasn't his primary job. And I guess, I don't know, 6-8 months ago, Dan sort of took the leap, quit his job as a paramedic, and is making custom knives full time now. So, should I take this out of the sheath? Yeah, why not? This knife is not 100% a Tope knife. I actually helped. I surely did. This is, as best my hands can craft it, a mid-tack Tope Knives TDC, which stands for Tope Daily Carry. And there's a story that goes with this, believe it or not. Yeah, a story on the TheApostleP channel. When I got to Escanaba last Friday and sat down in Mike Stewart's office, as I usually do, Mike's son Jim walked in, and in his hand was one of these knives in black paper micarta with red pins, I think. And I said, Jim, what is that? He said, that's a TDC. I said, would you mind if I held it? And he handed it to me, and I put it in my hand, and I went, oh, yeah, I did. I went, oh my goodness. And being as it was Friday of grinding weekend, I said, Jim, do you happen to have any TDC blanks laying around here? He goes, no, we don't. I said, well, you know, I'm heading over to Dan's this afternoon to sit and chat a little bit about what's going on with him and his knife making and all that good stuff. And I think I'll see if he has one. So after lunch, I headed out for Rapid River and walked in the door to the garage / knife shop at Dan's place. And doggone it if he didn't have a bevel ground and heat treated blank for a TDC. He sure did. And it was so nice of him to let me put stone to steel and finish this thing off. Here it is. So now I made a post in Tope Nation, that's Dan's Facebook group, I think on Monday when I got back from the grind-in, and there's this one guy, I know he loves knives, and I'm sure he's a nice guy, and I wouldn't call him a troll, but it's like, you know, there is no silver lining. This guy cannot find a cloud to wrap it with. So I posted some pictures of this, talked about it being a grind-in knife, which is technically not correct. And oh my gosh, this guy just came unglued. You know, all Bark River grind-in knives are supposed to have the grind-in etch. Clearly this does not. It says Tope on it. Oh my. What's that going to mean for the secondary market? How many of these knives were made by hacks like you at grind-ins and they say Tope on them? Well, okay. Does anybody who knows me really think, I don't know. So here's the story. It's technically not a grind-in knife. This is a Dan Tope TDC blank, processed through heat treating and bevel grinding by Dan Tope and his mid-tech associates. Assembled by me, finished by me, with a whole lot of help from Dan and some experts at Bark River on the way to completion. Also, as you will see later in this video, it was inspected by Dan and given his thumbs up before I posted anything on social media. And by the way, it is true, if you make a knife at the Bark River grind-in, it has an etch on the left side of the blade that is unique to that grind-in. Not one knife ever leaves there without that etch to protect the Bark River product line in the market, etc. Also, it's good for taking grind-in pictures that way. In order for a knife to leave there without that etch, approval has to be gained from the ownership of Bark River Knives, and in this case, the maker of the model that bears that maker's mark. Dan Tope owns that maker's mark. It could not have gone on this knife without his approval. Okay, so that's that out of the way. So who's this guy Dan Tope? As I said, he's a family man, former paramedic, and relatively new knife maker from Rapid River. Dan started making knives about when I went to my first grind-in, so 3 or 4 years ago. And I'm going to roll in some pictures as I kind of talk about his history. Of course, this is the latest run of mid-tech knives from Tope Knives. And I'll show some pictures of those, the real ones, not the ones I finished. And then before that, you may have heard of Dan because his first, I believe, mid-tech run was sort of a small, short, stout EDC fixed blade called the Bulldog that really got a lot of fanfare in the market. I'll show some pictures of that. In smaller knives, he's also made a model called the Lynx, which is sort of a small bushcrafter. The Scalpel, which can flex between sort of neck knife and EDC, a really small slicer. You will remember perhaps a couple years ago there was a Bark River model called the Vidar. That was a collaboration knife designed by Dan Tope with a really cool pin pattern in the handle and a very stylized bolster with a diagonal joint. Now, when I first met Dan, he was sort of making large field knives, bowie knives, fighting knives. Back in those days, he was using a lot of W2 tool steel and with some differential quenching and Hamones. Dan sort of has a trademark feature, and you're looking at it right here. It's the Harpoon Swedge. Now, you'll notice on some of those later knives that I mentioned, his large bowie knives, field knives, etc. Knives like the Task, which is sort of a staple large knife for Dan. And then the Prometheus, which is another large sort of bowie knife. And then a couple really, really neat military themed knives. the Juggernaut, which is sort of a field Bowie, and then the Doc Holliday, which is a ring knife that, and I hate ring knives, but this thing, once you have it in hand and watch how it balances, it's really quite an amazing knife. Even knives like the Gray Skull Dagger, which I think really represented a big step up in Dan's level of skill. But some of those early knives, I really liked Dan's design eye, but they sort of had sort of a thick, chunky appearance and feel to them. And I've been talking with a buddy of mine online lately, and thick and chunky seems to be a rather common occurrence in new knife makers. And as Dan's design and manufacturing capability have evolved and matured, he's really gravitated toward what he likes as a knife user, which are efficient, thin, slicing knives. He's even making a kukri right now that I believe he's going to do in a mid-tech run that is only about, what, 5/32 stock, which is kind of counterintuitive for a kukri, but it makes it light and fast. And that's sort of Dan, in his heart of hearts, what he likes. So let's talk about this TDC, Tope Daily Carry. And, if you see flaws on it, those are mine. They're not Dan's. I mean, I know where they are. You'll probably see them. So what we have is a knife that's, well, it's sized almost identically to my favorite of all time, full-size EDC fixed blades, the Bark River Gunny Sidekick, designed by Rob Bixby of the TheApostleP Knife Service, which these knives are both a little larger in blade than a Gunny or a Gunny Hunter. Notice the length difference. I'm going to put the fronts of the handles as close to even as I can, and then see where the tips of the blades fall. You'll see that the TDC and the Gunny Sidekick have almost identical 4 1/8 inch blades, and then back at like 3 3/4 you have the standard Gunny or Gunny Hunter. Now the TDC is going to have a little longer handle than a Gunny or a Gunny Sidekick, just a little more horn, as you can see. And not exactly a Loveless pattern, is it? This is pure Dan Tope, and we'll talk about that as we get on. So, a really, really cool knife. And that should give you sort of a size reference. So, 120 thousandths, 123 stock of CPM 3V. And as you can see, it is convex ground from about 3/4 of its height. And just in case you've already seen it, the reason that this blank was sort of in the scrap bin is because the bevel grinds were not the same. In fact, I kind of rounded this one up, so it's not quite as visually perfect on this side. I tried to even them up as best I could, and I kind of rounded the corner on that one. So that's all me, guys. That's not Dan. So if for some reason I die and my wife sells my estate, and you see this knife with its black and OD green linen polished micarta and black pins with a little bit of a funky transition, that's the one I made, so don't be confused. Don't be led astray. Anyway, so this is a wicked slicer. 1/8 inch stock, unlike the Gunny Sidekick that's 150 thousandths, okay? And it comes to a pretty skinny dimension behind the edge. Confession time here, guys. When it comes to sharpening, belts and polishing wheels are just not my thing. I cannot make a knife sharp using Bark River's equipment. I had to just sort of stop before I did any damage and then bring it home and finish it by hand. And have I ever mentioned that Bark River does an amazing job with 3V steel? I've never been able to get 3V as sharp as I can get it when Bark River does it. Can you not hear that? Yeah. That stuff rocks. But I just can't get it on their belts and polishing wheels. So had to come home and finish it. Not only do I think it's a gorgeous blade, it's a super functional cutter. A robust enough tip, I think, with that swedge. That Harpoon Swedge just comes to a very reinforcing thickness behind that edge. Gotta love that. A little jimping on the spine, and here again, I think most of the mid-tech TDCs you're going to find, the peaks are a little narrower. I think maybe I got a little adventurous as I was hafting the knife. Took off the peaks of the jimping a little more than usual. A couple other differences between this and a normal taupe TDC, and these aren't particularly functional. They're just because I could kinds of things, right? I think back in March at the Grind-In, Dan Tope sort of got together with Big D, Donovan Phillips, and they made a couple customized mid-tech TDCs. They moved the lanyard from the bottom of the horn, which is how the, if you looked at the picture of the mid-techs, it's down here in the bottom of the horn. They moved it up. Theirs were actually a little above center. Mine I sort of did right on center. And then the other thing they did, because Donovan is the king of the tapered tang, they put tapered tangs in those knives. So there were two, count them, two TDCs in the world that had tapered tangs until I saw Donovan just before I started working on this knife Saturday morning at the Grind-In. He said, "Oh, you're going to make a TDC?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "You going to do tapered tang?" I said, "I am now." So with Donovan's help, this 1/8 stock material gets skinnier and skinnier and skinnier until we reach it's about 25-28 thousandths thick at the butt of that knife. How cool is that? Now, obviously that's just because I can demonstration of skill by Donovan Phillips. However, it also just happens to make that knife balance perfectly. Oh. Now, a regular TDC, is the balance point going to be much different than that? No. And on a knife of this size, if it's going to fall, you want it to fall into the hand. You don't want it to fall so you drop it. You want it to fall into your hand. So this one, if it's very close. But if you get forward in the choil, it will fall into the hand. If you get rearward in the finger groove, it's going to balance perfectly. So in my eyes, it came out absolutely perfectly. How about that black and OD green linen? We were talking, Dan and Jim Stewart and I, as we were sort of admiring it when it was done, how wonderful a material linen micarta is. You know, we sort of tend to gravitate, don't we, on fixed blades to canvas micarta, because the coarseness sort of gives us a perception that it's going to be grippy when it's wet. But, you know, linen micarta will do the same thing, and when you polish a handle, it just looks so good. The subtlety of the layers as they catch the light, even if it wasn't two-tone, you'd still get that grain effect in a very subtle and dressy way. It's just cool stuff. I love linen micarta. So now, let's talk about this handle. This handle is what made me want to make this knife. Now, you could make the case that it's maybe a little longer than it needs to be as an EDC knife. I get that. However, not by much. I told this to Dan, and when you watch the little video clip of him looking at the finished knife that I handed him, there's something I told him, and I truly believe it. The more I hold this knife in my hand, the more I believe it. You think of famous knife handles in the 20th century, who do you think of? Well, number one, you think of Robert W. Lovelace, as interpreted by Mike Stewart, Bark River Knives, and why not, right? You think of Bill Moran, with his sort of pistol grip signature Moran handle, and also his later in life after arthritis handle as being, you know, let's say those two guys are the guys who have made the most ergonomic, most famously excellent fixed blade knife handles in the 20th century. Well, in the 21st century, I think when we look back 50, 75, 100 years from now, guys are going to be talking about the Dan Tope handle. Oh man, I'm telling you, if you haven't had one of these in hand, and those of you who are watching this video who own TDCs or have handled them, I want to hear your impressions in the comments, because, oh, I'm telling you, it's knife handle Nirvana. And it's not overly restrictive. You guys know I don't like a bunch of finger grooves and features on a knife handle that make you locked in a certain grip or position. Now, when you grab this knife in a saber grip, you're thinking, man, that is a saber grip. Well, okay, let's try a hammer grip. Equally awesome. Let's try an overhand pinch grip. Equally awesome. Let's try a horizontal draw. Still amazing. Let's try a vertical draw. The horn catches you, but not in an uncomfortable way. Not at all uncomfortable. It's got just enough wrap that it doesn't really dig into your palm in that grip. The only grip that's not super excellent is going to be the reverse grip, because of the length of the handle where your pinky wants to be in that finger groove. Makes it a bit of a reach for the thumb, but again, not uncomfortable. Certainly, absolutely usable in that grip. So, certainly more versatile than a Bill Moran handle, right? And guys, if you haven't had one of these in your hand, you need to. Dan sent me some data the other day on the 2 runs of this knife. Okay, so the first run was 100 pieces, plus or minus 1, and then the second run, which I think came out in May, was 275. There were slight changes made in the handle contour from Gen 1 to Gen 2. Frankly, I can't tell you which one this is. The edge thickness was made thinner on the second one. This must be a second generation blank, because it's mighty thin behind the edge. Now, what makes this a mid-tech instead of a Dan Tope custom? So whereas a custom Tope would be rough cut and ground and heat treated and handled and hafted and finished totally by Dan Tope at his shop, the mid-techs have a couple processes that are outsourced. Much like a Bark River knife is done, the blanks are water jetted, and then they are heat treated by an external source, and then the finished grinding and metal finishing is then done by Dan, as well as sharpening. While I'm talking about sharpening, Dan's knives are going to have convex primary bevels, or the face of the blade, but then he does a more standard maker's grind with a belt sander and a power strap, so it sort of looks like a V grind, unlike a Bark River knife, more like a, any other knife in the world. So those are the main differences. I think also the handles are CNC pre-cuts instead of made from slabs of handle material. So just a really well streamlined process for the mid-techs that takes hours out of the process of making knives, but doesn't reduce one bit the level of skill that's required to get to the end. Okay, so that's the difference between a $200, $250 mid-tech TDC and what, a $500 or $600 custom TDC. So that's pretty much it as far as what this knife is and how it's made and why it's so awesome. Now let's talk about the sheath. Usually I don't spend a lot of time talking about sheaths. I hate Kydex. I love leather. I don't like the way Kydex is noisy. I don't like the way it scratches knife blades. And I'll tell you what, guys, if you have a Kydex sheath and it doesn't scratch your knife, count yourself lucky, because you're the only one. Okay, so here's the Tope Sheath. So it's designed to be carried in a variety of ways. It can be carried vertically using either this loop or this one where I like to carry it, so in between the two cross loops, all the way under. Or you can move it up and get rid of this strap totally and use this loop as more of a dangle to carry it in a low rise position. You can get rid of this piece altogether and carry it horizontally, and it's totally ambidextrous. Depending on how you assemble the straps, it can be configured for left or right hand carry. Now when you get this knife, if you're lucky enough to get one, certainly they're all sold out at retailers now, but you can get one on the secondary market maybe. You'll notice this sheath has been wet formed. You'll notice if you have a sheath that hasn't been done like that by its original owner, you're going to want to do it because the knife is actually pretty loose in the sheath as it comes. It was really designed to be wet formed. And check out what happens after you wet form. Absolutely snaps in and doesn't move, doesn't rattle. Yeah, just an amazing sheath system. I love it. How do I wet form? Some of you might want to ask. I use 2 blocks of wood with 2 pieces of very firm closed cell foam, kind of like a swimming noodle. Inside the pieces of wood, I put the knife in the sheath, knife greased and wrapped in saran wrap so the water doesn't cause any rust. And then I just take the 2 pieces of wood with the 2 pieces of foam, put it in the vise, set it in there for an hour, come back, gingerly take the knife out because you don't want it to sit in a wet sheath all night even if it is greased, and then come back the next day and she done. Okay, so that's how we do that. Just a brilliant sheath on a brilliant knife. This is a knife designed to be carried every day if you're in such an environment that lets you do that. Used like crazy. It's 3V, so it's going to retain an edge extremely well. It's going to be super tough, and it's going to get really, really sharp, if I didn't mention that before. So guys, you're going to want to keep an eye on this Dan Tope character of Tope Knives, because he's getting better quickly. Keep an eye out for Dan. He is on the rise. Not only does he make great knives, he's an absolutely superb human being. I love him to death. Even if he made crappy knives, I'd love him to death. But it's really cool that he's an excellent knife maker as well. Absolutely happy to give him some exposure and give his product some screen time on the TheApostleP channel. Now, just so that you believe what I told you, I'm going to show you a little video clip here that is Dan looking at my knife right when I finished it. I mean, I just finished it and saw him in the lunchroom and handed it over, and here's what he had to say. Okay guys, the grind-in custom Tope Knives TDC has been finished. And I kind of finished it, and I'm going to hand it to Dan Tope, the godfather of this knife, and he's going to tell you all how bad of a knife maker I am.
Oh, beautiful.
You're lying.
I think I could have done a better job myself, Rob.
You are absolutely lying.
No, it looks good. It really does. I had this whole thing planned where I was going to say how terrible it looks, but it looks pretty good, man.
Does it?
Yeah. How do you like it?
I absolutely adore it.
Here's the real test.
It's not sharp yet.
No?
I'm no good on power equipment, so I'll do it at home.
Oh, that's right. It's not sharp.
It's not sharp.
Yeah.
It's not even close to sharp.
It'll probably cut paper. I don't have any hair left on my arms to check it, so.
I do.
It's not sharp.
I got lots.
I bet it's sharp.
No, it's not really.
Not sharp.
No, it's not. I don't even know if it shaves, does it?
It has a couple of spots that shave.
Right.
I'd say right there, we got nothing.
I'm disappointed.
Right there, we got nothing.
I'm kidding.
So what?
Because I know this will probably be the sharpest TDC on the market.
It will be by
home.
tomorrow night. Yeah.
Who did this terrible tapered tang job on here?
Yeah.
That's pretty thick on the bottom. Come on, man.
Yeah, I mean, Donovan Phillips is sort of like the master of the tapered tang. I think he was having an off day.
That was an off day.
It's probably like 28 thousandths thick at the butt.
That's cool.
Yeah, we're kidding, of course. He says one of 3 tapered tang TDCs in the world. At
least 25.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, somewhere in that. It's
great.
thin. It's beautiful too. I'm glad I didn't use any liners because it really shows
Did you
off
get a good shot of it?
Ooh. I think that black and green linen micarta and those black pins just...
So this was the last little bit of this that I had, and you just got them another order. I'm gonna order a whole other sheet.
Are you really? It's beautiful.
Yeah, I had forgotten. I actually have a couple of personal knives with this. I forgot how good it looks polished. I like matte finish on micartas, but that looks pretty good polished.
Depends on the texture of the layers.
It does. Linen feels really good matte finish.
It does.
It does.
It tends to look a little bit better polished.
I'm a big fan of linen.
Me
I'm
too.
a big fan of linen layers. I like the texture of just linen, even if it's a solid color. I just like it. It's better.
Linen?
Yeah,
Better than canvas.
I do.
Same here.
It's just like an aesthetic thing where I just like the smaller pattern. Get out of there.
Same here. My
Jackson.
favorite micarta is linen for the same reasons.
Yep.
I like the way it looks. I like the way it feels in the hand.
I mean, so it could be the
And
whole
like
thing.
a dumbass, I bought a sheet of it.
A vehement bomb. Yeah.
We were just talking about how terrible of a taper tang job that is.
Oh, it's just
Yeah, I did that freehand.
down to 1 atom. Yeah. Is this one you guys made yesterday?
That's my grinding knife.
That's your grinding knife.
Yeah.
Nice. What a score.
Yeah.
Who did the tapering on that? Don?
Well, since Donovan's not here, I did it.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, that's crazy. That guy's a freak.
He is a freak,
We're
isn't
giving him shit. Like, she must have been your off day or something, man. Come on.
Yeah, couldn't you do any better than that?
That is on the bottom.
Takes it down to like a proton.
Yeah, subatomic level.
It's about to change its own element because it's so zen.
So for those of you who aren't familiar, that TDC is from D-Tope Knives, Dan Tope, proprietor. I think a little masterpiece of an EDC knife.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And
Nothing wrong with that title.
Dan, what do you have coming out soon?
Bulldogs are going to be next. Some people are familiar with those. That was my first mid-tech that I ever did was a Bulldog. Excuse me. So we're going to come out with the Bulldogs next. I think there's probably going to be around 250 of them total.
Which is sort of a short, stout EDC fixed
Yeah, and I
blade.
don't have one nearby to show you.
I'll put a picture up to show you guys when I edit this.
Yeah. It definitely fits the title of Bulldog. And those are in CPM 3V as well.
Awesome.
And then after that, I've got some very large kukris in the pipe. I think that's going to be my next mid-tech.
I think you just shared pictures of the heat treat, right?
What's that? No. I have a custom that I'm working on pre-heat treat.
Okay, gotcha.
And those are going to be more of a semi-custom,
Right.
more than a mid-tech.
And kind of a wicked kukri.
It's pretty wicked because Rob, you were there at the shop the other day, and Rob got to handle one of the blanks.
Yeah, it's a light, fast
Well,
kukri.
when I say blanks, I mean it's a
bevel ground.
hand done blank.
Pre-heat treat blank. Yeah.
Yeah, pre-heat treat custom blank.
It's kind of a thin, fast kukri, isn't it?
It is. It is.
Yeah.
I've had a few of them that I've made in different steels, like W2 and things like that, and I've had those ones a little bit thicker. With the 3V, with the 3, yeah, people are working.
It's the normal
3V,
noises
you can
around
take
here.
it down pretty thin. So I'm pretty excited. I haven't done a kukri in a while.
Right. So
I have never done one in 3V yet, so that'll be interesting to
That'll be awesome.
see the finish grinds on that.
And
It'll be pretty cool.
guys, I don't know that if you're not familiar with Dan, this is hard to grasp, but you made your first knife for sale when?
Probably between 3 or 4 years ago.
Right. And we were sort of sitting around in Mike's office the other day, and there was a group of people sitting there who know what they're talking about and unanimously agreed nobody's come as far in 3 or 4 years as Dan Tope.
Thank you.
Your stuff is amazing nowadays.
Thank you.
So you guys keep a lookout for it, and it's only getting better.
Thank you.
And mark my words, 50 years from now, when people talk about knife handles, They're going to talk about Bill Moran, Bob Lovelace, and Dan Tope.
Thank you.
Wait for the review on this TDC. It's an amazing, amazing knife handle and a great blade too.
Thanks, Rob.
So thanks for the time, Dan. I appreciate you sharing
I appreciate
a little bit.
it.
See, I ain't no knife maker, but every now and then I can avoid scrapping a knife. And I'm really happy I did on this one because it was the last blank in existence. Okay, that's all for this one, my friends. Thanks for hanging in there with me. I hope you enjoyed it, and go buy some D-Tope knives. He deserves it. That's all for this one. Grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. And remember, the word is sharp.